The morning sun barely pierced through the dense canopy of Pine Ridge Forest, casting long golden streaks through the towering pines. A fine mist clung to the ground, curling around tree trunks like wisps of forgotten breath. It was the kind of silence that only deep wilderness knew, until it was broken by the soft whimper of a child. Noah Collins, barely 18 months old, sat alone in the middle of the forest, his blue pajamas damp with morning dew. His tiny fingers clutched at the pine needles beneath him, his face streaked with dried tears. There were no trails nearby, no campsites within miles. Yet, here he was, lost. And he was not alone. Just 20 feet away, a massive brown bear stood watching him. Her fur was thick, her eyes dark and intelligent, but she did not growl or charge. She simply observed, head tilted slightly, as though trying to understand why this tiny human had wandered into her domain. Samantha Willis, an early morning hiker with a passion for wildlife photography, was the first to witness the scene. Hidden behind a fallen log, she fumbled with her camera, her breath caught in her throat. Through the zoom lens, she saw something astonishing. The bear wasn't threatening the child. It was guarding him. Each time Noah tried to crawl toward the steep drop-off nearby, the bear moved to block his path. When he cried, she let out soft, huffing sounds, as if trying to comfort him. Samantha's hands trembled as she snapped photos, documenting what would soon become one of the most baffling and heartwarming wildlife encounters ever recorded. "I've studied bears for 20 years, said Forest Ranger Tom Blackwood later that day, examining the photos. "I've never seen anything like this. That bear should have either attacked or run away. Instead, she was protecting him." The mystery deepened when the search and rescue team finally arrived. As they approached, the bear retreated into the trees, but she didn't leave completely. She watched from the shadows as paramedics checked the child. Noah was dehydrated but unharmed. A miracle, considering he had spent a freezing night alone in predator-filled woods. But the tracks in the mud told an even stranger story. "These wolf prints," wildlife biologist Maria Chen pointed out, tracing them in the dirt. "They circle around, but never come closer than 30 feet. She glanced toward the forest, where the bear still lingered. "That's because of her." She established a protective perimeter. Noah's parents, Claire and David Collins, had been frantic. They had put their son to bed as usual, checking on him before going to sleep. Yet by morning, his crib was empty, the front door wide open, no footprints, no fingerprints, no security footage. It was as if he had simply vanished. The truth would prove stranger than anyone could have imagined. 3 days after Noah's rescue, Claire stood at the kitchen window, gazing at the backyard where their property met the edge of the forest. Then she saw something that sent a shiver down her spine. At the tree line, barely visible between the trunks, stood the bear. Scarface. That was what the locals called her. The most feared and territorial female brown bear in Pine Ridge. She had earned the name from deep claw scars across her muzzle, likely from old battles over food and territory. But now, she wasn't acting like a predator. She was watching, not moving, not approaching, just watching. When Claire called the forest rangers, what they discovered beneath the soil of their backyard left everyone stunned. Just inches below the surface, buried near the tree line, they found bones. Small ones, bear cub bones. Dr. Eliza Jones, a forensic veterinarian, studied them closely. These bones are about 15 years old. This was Scarface's cub. The picture began to take shape. 15 years ago, during the construction of the Collins home, Scarface had likely lost her cub. Maybe to construction equipment, maybe to something else. no one could say for sure. But one thing was clear: Scarface had never forgotten. Bears have extraordinary spatial memory, Dr. Maria Chen explained. When she found Noah alone in the forest, something triggered her maternal instincts. Instead of seeing him as human, she saw a baby that needed protection. The realization left everyone shaken. The night Noah disappeared, his bedroom window had been left cracked open for fresh air. Investigators theorized that a strong gust of wind had blown it open completely. Noah, newly able to climb out of his crib, had likely wandered outside, disoriented, and followed random paths into the woods. Where Scarface found him, where she remembered her own loss, where, for one night, she decided that this baby would not die in her forest. Noah's parents could no longer stay in a home built over such a tragedy. They worked with forest services to establish the land as a protected wildlife sanctuary. Today, a small plaque marks the entrance to what is now Scarface Reserve. It reads, "Where a mother's love transcended species." Scarface still roams those woods. Sometimes hikers spot her at the edge of the trees, watching, just watching, the human world that once took her cub, but for one night gave her a chance to be a mother again. And perhaps, in the wisdom only children possess, Noah Collins understood that simple truth better than anyone. On his bedroom wall hangs a framed photograph of Scarface. When asked about it, he simply says, "That's my forest friend. Mom says she watched over me when I was lost." And maybe, just maybe, that explanation is enough. The news of Scarface's inexplicable act spread quickly. Wildlife experts, journalists, and even skeptics debated the story. Was it instinct, coincidence, or something far more profound? An act of cross-species empathy that science had yet to understand. For Noah's parents, none of that mattered. What mattered was that their child had been saved, and they now felt a responsibility to honor the bear that had protected him. But what no one expected was that Scarface's connection to Noah was far from over. Dr. Maria Chen, a wildlife biologist specializing in bear behavior, decided to stay in Oak Ridge after the incident. What had begun as a brief research trip turned into a years-long study into interspecies relationships. She set up cameras and observation points near Scarface's known territory, hoping to document the bear's habits. What she found changed everything. Scarface was not just living her life deep in the wilderness. She was watching over the town. At first, the evidence was subtle. Camera footage showed her patrolling the edges of the reserve. Other predators, wolves, coyotes, even rival male bears, avoided areas where she had been. It was as if she had claimed this section of the forest not for herself, but for something more. Then a pattern emerged. Whenever a storm was approaching, Scarface would leave the deeper woods and position herself near the forest's edge, right where she had first seen Noah. The same days, Noah would grow unusually restless. He would ask to go outside, to visit the trees. At first, Claire dismissed it as coincidence, but after 5 separate occurrences, she began to wonder. It was as if they could sense each other, she later told a journalist. "I know how crazy that sounds. If I hadn't lived through this, I wouldn't believe it either." Skeptics tried to explain it away. Some argued that Noah was merely reacting to barometric pressure changes, a subconscious sensitivity to the weather. Others said the bear's behavior was territorial, not maternal. But then Noah began drawing pictures. He would sit for hours, scribbling shapes in colored pencils. At first, they looked like simple childish doodles, until Claire and David realized what they were. He was drawing Scarface. Not just generic bears, but her. The markings, the scars, the exact shape of her face. And then came the stories. One night, as Claire tucked Noah into bed, he looked up at her with wide eyes. "Mama Bear showed me how to find water," he said matter-of-factly. Claire's breath caught. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Noah pointed to the trees outside his window. "In the forest. She digs in the dirt near the trees when she's thirsty. That's where the water is." Claire dismissed it as childhood imagination until she mentioned it to Dr. Chen. The biologist's expression turned pale. "That's real bear behavior," she murmured. "Not something a child would just guess." It got even stranger. One afternoon, Dr. Chen showed Noah a series of bear photographs, different individuals from different locations. She asked him to point out Scarface. Without hesitation, Noah tapped the correct image. "This one," he said. Dr. Chen exchanged a look with Claire and David. "There's no way he should be able to do that," she whispered. "He's not just recognizing her, he knows her." By the time Noah turned 3, the media frenzy had died down, allowing the Collins family some semblance of peace. They turned down book deals, refused interviews, and tried to give Noah a normal childhood. But Oak Ridge had changed. The Scarface Reserve became a destination, not for casual tourists, but for researchers, conservationists, and those fascinated by the extraordinary connection between a bear and a boy. Wildlife cameras revealed that Scarface was still there, still watching. But she was getting older, and no one, not even Noah, was prepared for what happened next, the moment that changed everything. It began on a crisp autumn evening when another child went missing. Emma Lawson, the 7-year-old daughter of the town's mayor, vanished while playing near the forest's edge. Panic spread through Oak Ridge. Search teams were formed. Volunteers combed through the woods, shouting her name. But as the sun set and temperatures dropped, fear turned to desperation. Then, just before dawn, a miracle. Emma was found curled up inside a hollow log, fast asleep and unharmed. And beside her, pressed into the dirt, were huge paw prints. Brown bear prints. When asked how she survived the night alone in the freezing woods, Emma's answer sent chills through the town. "She was following me," the little girl said simply, "just like Noah said she would." The evidence was undeniable. Emma had wandered into the woods alone, frightened and lost, but just like Noah years before, Scarface had found her. The town that had once debated whether Scarface's actions were coincidence or miracle had its answer. She wasn't just a bear, she was a guardian. And from that moment forward, Oak Ridge would never see her the same way again. Scarface's second rescue shook the town to its core. The people of Oak Ridge had spent years debating whether Noah's story was an anomaly, an act of instinct, or something deeper. But now, with Emma Lawson's survival, doubt was no longer an option. The bear had chosen to protect them. Again. The town, once divided, now came together in a way no one had seen before. The mining company that had planned to build near the reserve withdrew its proposal within a week. Instead, they donated funds to expand conservation efforts. The message was clear. Scarface wasn't just a legend. She was a protector. But Noah already knew that. At just 4 years old, he spoke about Scarface with a quiet certainty that unnerved adults, but fascinated scientists. "She knows when we're in trouble," he would say, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "She listens to us." Dr. Maria Chen, now the lead researcher at the Scarface Reserve, had spent years studying the bear. She had documented everything: her movements, her hunting patterns, even her interactions with other wildlife. But Scarface's behavior toward humans was something science couldn't explain. The moment that changed everything came 2 years later. It was a brutal winter, one of the coldest in Oak Ridge's history. Snow buried the small town under thick, icy layers. Roads were impassable, and supplies were running low. The Henderson family, Jim, Melissa, and their 4-year-old twins, lived in an isolated cabin 3 miles outside town. When Jim set out for the emergency clinic to get medicine for Melissa's fever, he never returned. 2 days later, a desperate radio call came from Melissa. "We have no more firewood," she whispered, her voice weak. "The kids are freezing." The town sprang into action, but the roads were impossible to clear in time. The snow was too deep, the temperatures too deadly. That's when Noah stepped forward. "I know a way," he said simply. At 6 years old, Noah had an unusual understanding of the land and of Scarface. No one wanted to take the risk, but time was running out. Melissa and her children wouldn't survive the night. A team was formed. Noah's father, David, 2 experienced rangers, and Noah himself. They set out on foot at dawn. The storm was relentless, the snow so deep that even the adults struggled to walk through it. But Noah didn't hesitate. He moved with purpose, stopping occasionally to listen, to something no one else could hear. Then, after 2 miles of treacherous trekking, disaster struck. One of the rangers stepped on what looked like solid ground, only to plunge through ice into a freezing creek below. David and the second ranger managed to pull him out, but the damage was done. His body was soaked, his limbs shaking violently. "We have to turn back," the second ranger insisted, helping his partner remove his wet clothing. David looked between his injured team member and the direction of the Henderson cabin, still a mile away. They were running out of time. That's when Noah spoke. "Dad and I will go on." The adults balked at the idea. It was reckless, it was dangerous. But Noah was certain. "She's waiting for us," he said softly. Before anyone could argue further, the sound came. 3 distinct huffs, cutting through the howling wind. Noah turned toward the trees, eyes wide. "She's here." At first, David saw nothing, just swirling snow and dark tree trunks. Then a shadow moved. 20 yards ahead, a massive form materialized from the storm. Scarface. She stood still, watching them. Then, without hesitation, she turned and began walking. Not running. Leading. David hesitated for only a second. Then he followed. For 30 agonizing minutes, they trailed the bear. She chose paths that no human would have found. Routes where overhanging trees had blocked the worst of the snowfall, creating a natural corridor. She paused when they fell behind. She waited. And then, just as darkness began to fall, the Henderson cabin appeared through the trees. Light flickered weakly from a frost-covered window. They had made it. Scarface stopped at the edge of the clearing. She watched as Noah and David ran to the door. Inside, the scene was worse than they had feared. Melissa lay semi-conscious on a couch, her fever dangerously high. The twins huddled together under a blanket, their tiny bodies shaking. There was almost no firewood left. David immediately administered the antibiotics and wrapped Melissa in emergency blankets. But without heat, she wouldn't last through the night. He grabbed his coat. "I'll find something to burn," he said, preparing to head back out into the storm. "Wait." Noah was staring out the window. David followed his gaze and froze. Outside, in the deepening twilight, Scarface was moving again. She was dragging something toward the house, a fallen branch, then another, then another. For the next 20 minutes, the bear gathered firewood, uncovering logs buried beneath the snow, retrieving what the family couldn't reach. When she was done, she stepped back into the trees. Noah's voice was quiet, but filled with certainty. "She's helping us." David, a man who had once dismissed all of this as coincidence, couldn't deny what he was seeing. "Yes," he whispered, "she is." That night, thanks to Scarface's firewood, the cabin stayed warm. By morning, the storm had passed, and the sound of approaching snowmobiles filled the air. Rescuers had arrived, but Scarface was gone. Her tracks led back into the forest. She had done what she came to do. She had saved them all. And just like that, she had disappeared again. Noah, standing outside, smiled softly. "She knows we're safe now," he said simply. David turned to look at his son. For the first time, he didn't question it. He just believed. The rescue of the Henderson family was the final piece of the puzzle, the moment that turned Scarface from a legend into a living guardian. No longer was she just a mysterious bear who had saved a child once. She had done it again, and again. First Noah, then Emma, now an entire family. For the people of Oak Ridge, there was no more doubt. The mining project that had threatened the reserve was permanently canceled. Instead, the company funded an educational center at the entrance of the newly expanded Scarface Wildlife Reserve. Tourists arrived in waves, hoping for a glimpse of the legendary bear. Scientists, skeptics, and conservationists all wanted answers. But Scarface was nowhere to be found. She had disappeared back into the depths of the forest, leaving behind only her tracks and her undeniable impact. But Noah still felt her presence. Even as life returned to normal, even as he grew older, he never once doubted that she was still watching. At age 7, Noah's connection to the bear deepened in ways no one could explain. He would pause mid-play, tilt his head slightly, and whisper, "She's nearby." Moments later, rangers would report fresh bear tracks along the edge of town. His parents were used to it by now. The unspoken bond between their son and Scarface had gone beyond anything science could explain. Then, the biggest shock came. A new trail camera set up near Scarface's known territory captured something unprecedented. Not just Scarface, another bear. A younger female with faint but familiar scars across her muzzle. Dr. Maria Chen was the first to review the footage. She stared at the screen, her hands trembling. "She has a daughter," she whispered. This wasn't supposed to happen. Female bears rarely maintained long-term bonds with their offspring. Cubs were usually pushed away once they reached maturity. But here they were, Scarface and her daughter, walking together. It wasn't just shocking, it was revolutionary. For years, Scarface had been a guardian of the forest, protecting humans in ways no one could explain. Now, it seemed, she had passed that role on. Her daughter, soon nicknamed Echo, was watching and learning. Rangers observed her patrolling the same boundaries, walking the same trails, lingering near town, but never approaching humans directly. It was as if she was waiting, watching, protecting, and Noah knew it. "She remembers," he said simply when shown the footage. "She knows what her mother did." Dr. Chen, skeptical as ever, reviewed thousands of hours of trail camera footage. What she found was undeniable. Echo wasn't just mimicking Scarface's movements. She was following Noah. Whenever he visited the reserve, Echo appeared. Never too close, but always within range. She was learning from a distance, just as Scarface had once done. And when Noah turned 8, something even more astonishing happened. A hidden den was discovered deep within the reserve. Inside were 3 objects, deliberately placed together. A child's mitten, matching the pair Noah had worn the night he was lost in the forest. A rusted hunting trap, the kind that had likely scarred Scarface years ago. A smooth river stone marked with traces of bear milk. A tool mother bears use to nurse cubs when they are injured. It was a memory capsule, a collection of items that meant something to Scarface. A message left behind for anyone who could understand it. When Noah saw the photos, he didn't even seem surprised. "She remembers everything," he said softly, "just like we do." Scientists scrambled to explain the impossible. Was this abstract thought, emotional memory, or was it something even deeper? For Noah, there was no debate. Scarface wasn't just any bear. She was something the world had never seen before, and her daughter was following in her footsteps. As the seasons passed, Echo continued to appear at the forest's edge. She wasn't aggressive, she never came too close, but she was there, watching, listening, and waiting for what no one could say. But Noah had a feeling. Her story was just beginning. The years passed, and the world kept watching. Scarface had changed everything. The way people saw bears, the way scientists understood them, and the way humans thought about their connection to nature. But time was running out. By the time Noah was 10, Scarface had not been seen for months. Dr. Chen feared the worst. "She's old," she told Noah's parents. "She's lived longer than most wild bears ever do." Noah knew. One night, he woke up in tears. "She's gone," he whispered. The next morning, rangers found her. Scarface had passed peacefully in a sunlit clearing, surrounded by wildflowers. Echo was beside her, refusing to leave. The town mourned. Some suggested building a monument in the reserve, a statue to honor the bear that had protected them. Noah refused. "She doesn't belong in a building," he said. "She belongs here." And so they left her resting place untouched, a sacred spot in the heart of the forest. But her legacy didn't end there. For the first time, Echo stepped forward. She took her mother's place, watching, guarding, waiting. Scientists documented her unusual behavior. Echo wasn't like other bears. She patrolled the reserve's edges. She kept her distance from humans, but never left completely. She had learned everything from Scarface, and now she was teaching her own cubs. Noah, now 11, stood at the reserve boundary one morning and whispered, "She remembers." He felt it. Scarface was gone, but her story wasn't over. Echo and her cubs were still there. The cycle continued. As Noah grew, so did his purpose. At 16, he became the youngest intern at the reserve. At 18, he left for university to study wildlife biology. At 25, he returned to Oak Ridge to lead the Scarface Conservation Program. But his connection to the forest never changed. On his 30th birthday, Noah walked alone to Scarface's resting place. He sat in silence, feeling the unspoken presence of the bear that had shaped his life. Then, something moved at the forest's edge. A large brown shape standing just beyond the tree line. Echo. She was older now, her fur streaked with gray. Beside her, a young cub peeked out, watching Noah with wide, curious eyes. Noah smiled. "She remembers," he whispered. "And now, so will they." The story of Scarface would live on, not in books, not in statues, but in the wild, in the silent footsteps of her descendants, in the whispered bond between a boy and a bear. in the legacy of love and protection that had begun with one night, one child, and one mother's instinct to protect. Noah turned back toward the reserve. Behind him, the bears vanished into the trees. But he knew they were never really gone, because some connections last forever. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. What would you have done in Noah's place? Tell us in the comments below.